I'm Ryan McRae from Three Chapters a Day, and I have the honor to talk to my new friend TJ Klune, New York Times best-selling author. TJ, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. I have a lot of questions, and I am excited that I got my grimy, gritty hands on the bones beneath my skin. And I'm going to start as you shouldn't start on an interview. I really love this. I really thought it was fantastic. I really was like, I was enthralled at this story,
Thank you.
and this book kind of has been on a journey, and I would love for you
Mhm.
to tell us about the journey of this book. I read the acknowledgments and was like, what is happening with this?
Yeah, so I was with a small independent publisher from the start of my career in 2011 up into this book, The Bones Beneath My Skin. And it was the indie publisher was fine for a while. It was something that I didn't really know any better. In fact, the how I got with them was I wrote my very first book, a very imperfect book, and I went online and I Googled gay publishers, and they were the first one I clicked on, and they were the one I submitted the book to, and they were the ones that accepted the book. And then, 8 months later, the book came out. That
Oh,
first book came out. And that's not how things work anymore, even though doesn't seem like that long ago. When it comes down to it, in the history of publishing, 2011 may as well be 1811 for
right,
how
right.
many things
Oh,
have
wow.
changed since
Yeah.
then. Um, and so I was with this publisher for a while, and I started writing The Bones Beneath My Skin in 2017, but I knew that there was a change in the wind that I could feel that wasn't that great. And I would find out a little bit later, but to go back to The Bones Beneath My Skin, what happened was I submitted this book to them, and then I received an email that I probably was not supposed to see. And that was an email meant for my editor. And the email said something to the effect of, here's TJ Klune's new book. This one is weird, even for him. And look, that word weird, I heard that so much as a kid as a
Yeah.
pejorative from parents, from teachers, from classmates, from random adults. That's all I heard my entire life growing up, was that I was weird. And that was not a good thing. So you can imagine then getting this email as an adult, seeing that word weird being used as a pejorative.
Right.
That gave me these really crazy, like almost PTSD flashbacks. I
Yeah.
was like, why would yeah, I'm weird. I love being weird, but they're not using the word weird the way I would use the word
Right.
weird. So what did I do? I got pissed and I took the book back from them. I said, no, I don't want to publish it with you. And again, it turned out to be the craziest timing, because shortly after I made that decision, it would come out that this publisher had been embezzling from authors, from cover artists, from editors, and they owe, still to this day, they owe me in the five figures of money that I will probably never see again. So in addition to pulling The Bones Beneath My Skin to self-publish something I had never done before, I
Right.
had to pull 20 plus novels from this publisher and republish all of them on my own. This is before I was signed with Tor and Macmillan.
Right.
This was before any of that. All I knew was that my entire carefully crafted house of cards was crumbling because this publisher decided to steal money. So I published all of my back novels and The Bones Beneath My Skin almost all at the same time. And The Bones Beneath My Skin, to me, got lost in that
Yeah.
noise. So when Tor, when I signed with Tor for The House in the Cerulean Sea, that book came out and did better than probably anyone expected. And so Tor, of course, was like, hey, we want to publish some of your back catalog. And I want to be very clear with this. Tor had offered to purchase my entire back catalog even before The House in the Cerulean Sea came out. They had put a lot of faith and a lot of trust in me, which was wonderful. Of course, me having just had this experience with another publisher said, no, why would I give you all of
Right.
my books? Why would I give you everything when I just went through this really shitty situation with a different publisher? They were fine. They were cool with it. And then later on, after The House in the Cerulean Sea and Under the Whispering Door, they came back and said, "Hey, what do you think about publishing some more of your back titles with us now that you know how we work?" And I said, "Okay, let's start with the Green Creek series because those were already really successful. And I knew that getting them to a wider audience would only be better for those stories. And then I also said, I have this other book called The Bones Beneath My Skin that I adore, that I don't think got a fair shake when it came out. And they, more power to Tor. They said, hell yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
There was never anything about this book is too weird. So I have found a partner in my publisher that appreciates my weirdness. And this book is an effort of that. The book is an effort of me trying to do something different that I've never done before. And I love how The Bones Beneath My Skin turned out.
Yeah. I loved it too. And I don't know, I'm gonna do this is gonna be the best spoiler-free
Yes.
conversation we can have, but I have to tread lightly. But you've got three characters here. You have Art, who a little girl, and you have Alex, the Marine, and you have Nick, the journal
Nate. Uh-huh.
Nate,
Mhm.
the journalist. Um, he's not a reporter, he's a journalist. Um,
Yeah, you have to make that
uh,
difference. Yeah.
yeah, Nate and yeah, and they have this, I guess you'd call it, they meet up. I wouldn't
Mhm.
necessarily call it a meet cute, but meet up, and they're on a journey now to figure out where Art belongs. And
Mhm.
um, can you tell me, like, talk to me about how these characters kind of came into view for you as you were coming up with this story?
Yeah. So I originally had the idea for this book back in 2015, but it was going to be something completely different. I wanted to put my own mark on a type of trope that I find fascinating. And to look at that trope, you would look at books like Robert McCammon's Boy's Life or Stephen King's It. Basically, a group of children in an adult novel have to come together to defeat some kind of whatever. In
Right,
my head, I had this idea of what if there was a group of young teenage boys having to come together to protect a little girl who was more than she appeared. And I didn't really do anything with that. It was just an idea that I had cooking in my head, which I'm glad that I didn't do anything with because the very next year in 2016, something called Stranger Things came out.
right,
And I was like, oh, okay, there goes that idea. Because
right,
I'm sure I could have written it and I'm sure I would have done something completely different, but there would have always been that, oh, Stranger Things just came out. So Stranger Things is what everybody's doing. So I let it sit for a little while. And when it came down to it, I realized that I could still go the direction of a girl who's different than other people, who has something extra or something special about her. But instead of making it children that are doing the protecting, what if it is two people who are broken in ways that they don't know that they could ever be fixed? What
right,
does it look like when people have missing parts come together? And what does it look like when those pieces can almost fit together themselves to make the picture again? What does it look like when three people who come from different backgrounds, different worlds, are forced together to fight for something that they believe in? What does that look like? And I love this story because Art is the heart and soul of the book. Yeah, you said it correctly. There's three main characters. There's Nate, there's Alex, and then there's Art. All three of these characters, even though the book is told from Nate's point of view, all three of these characters share the exact same page time. They're always in the book. Every single one of them is always in the book. And it's just, I'm known for writing books with bigger casts, with many main characters and whatnot. So being able to write about just three people and the world around them was fascinating because you're able to zero in as opposed to having to take a big macro look at something. You could zero in and focus on little issues while also writing a bigger story around it. Art was the first one that came to mind, though. She has always been there. And if you've read, I started right after I finished the Bones Beneath My Skin, I started writing The House in the Cerulean Sea. And if you've read The House in the Cerulean Sea, you will be able to see a lot of art in the kids. She is a precursor for the kids on the island in the house in the Cerulean Sea, and I love how she turned out.
Yeah, I almost, as someone who is also ADHD, I almost want to like, I need this to be a film adaptation quickly. So when people are like, what is it like to have ADHD? I just want to like point to art and just be like, want them
Yes.
to hyper focusing where she reads every Western novel she can,
Hmm.
just absorbs them, or she says things that are funny, or just she grabs at people's attention, or she gets enthralled with bacon. I hope it's not a spoiler for the listener.
No.
And I saw that and I was like, oh, I get that. And just
Yeah.
how, you know,
Well,
how they
because
have
I
to
kept
respond to
thinking,
her. Yeah, they're like,
I kept thinking about what would it look like for an outsider to come in and look at the human race? What would it look for an outsider to come in and what would they think about humans
right,
and what humans do and what we think? And yeah, there's probably the ADHD aspect of it because that governs very much a large part of
yeah,
my life. But I find it fascinating. What if you went to an alien world? Do you think you'd be focused on the big picture all the time? No, you'd be focused on little things that are
right,
different. You'd be making comparisons to how things are where you're from and how things are now where you are. And I love that idea of art. Yes, she's finding books, but not just any types of books. She finds adult novels that she should probably not be reading and that are taken away from her, but she also finds Louis L'Amour.
right.
And Louis L'Amour is, look, if you want to read the best Western ever, read Lonesome Dove.
Yeah,
But if you want to read books that are like candy, that are like popcorn, that are very snack filled, you read Louis L'Amour because he wrote dozens upon dozens upon dozens of books, and they're pretty much the same story
yep,
throughout every single book. There's a man comes to save a town or comes to save a valley. There's sometimes a woman. There's obviously going to be a bad guy who is mustache twirling, blah, blah,
right,
blah. And I just, could you imagine if that was your introduction to humanity? If
right.
that's what you thought humans were always like? And I just, this idea of this otherworldly creature coming to our planet, coming to our world and picking up on things like Louis L'Amour and bacon. And yes, Artemis Darth Vader is in the body of a 10-year-old girl. She still acts like a 10-year-old, but I did want to allow a bit of precociousness that I typically try to avoid because nobody likes it when child characters talk like little adults. And
Yeah,
I've done that before and I've gotten better, but I have done that before. So I wanted to I had to walk a fine line between being a kid and being something else because that's what she is. So I had to mush those two together. So yeah, an ADHD perspective kind of fits for her because she's
yeah,
like, ooh, what is that? Ooh, what is that? Ooh, what is that?
yeah. Because to her, it's all fascinating, and
Yeah.
that's the crux of the ADHD person, to be like, this is all interesting, and so
Yeah, she has her hyper fixations
yeah,
on the things that she likes to that she interest her. Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. And then, I really love Nate. And you take this, I heard you in a previous interview say like homophobia is boring, and I'm like,
Yeah.
yes, it is boring.
Yeah, homophobes are boring people.
They're just
It's
boring
just how it
people,
is.
and um, in this book you have he's gay. His parents have found out, and they do not take it well. He
Mhm.
is, and what I appreciated, and I was reading it, and I was trying to just, I'm reading this, I want to enjoy it, but then there's like that part of you who's like, what is that about? That
Mhm.
little voice, and what popped up for me is like his parents didn't approve of him, and they were not religious, and I
Mhm.
was like, and as someone who's read a lot of LGBT literature, it's usually the crux, like highly religious
Mhm.
family, instant outcasts, and you were like, you know what? Homophobia doesn't have to be this link to religion every time. It could just be they just don't like it. And
Mhm.
tell me how you got there, and tell me just a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I grew up in a household that was not loving in any way, shape, or form. I learned very early on that things that brought me joy were things that could be taken away. I had parents who made fun of me for my love of reading and writing. So you
Mhm.
can imagine how that would go for especially a kid growing up in rural Oregon in the 80s and 90s. I was effeminate. I had undiagnosed ADHD, which meant I never shut up. I couldn't sit still. I never did anything that I was supposed to do. And I was impulsive. I did things that were not correct. But at the same time, I can't say, oh, I blame it on the ADHD, but that's a big part of it. It,
Sure.
it, it is, especially when you're a kid whose parents refuse to take you to a doctor to get diagnosed.
Right.
So you don't have any tools to be
Yeah.
able to help you. And again, this is the 80s and 90s. So ADHD neurodiverse research was not where it is
No,
today. And
no.
so I wanted to include the bits and parts of myself. Authors do that, whether intentionally or unintentionally. That is how we learn and relate to what we're writing.
Sure.
But with homophobia, I tend to take the stance that homophobia is boring. Again, that homophobes are boring. I've experienced enough homophobia in my life to last several lifetimes. I don't need to necessarily put that in every single one of my books. The great thing about writing fantasy is I can remove the parts of reality that I don't like. However, this book is very much grounded in reality, even though it's fantastical. And I knew that if I was going to be setting this book in a very specific time period, that I would have to deal with those kinds of thinking. And I grew up in a house that was not religious by any stretch of the imagination. I went anytime I had to go stay with my step grandparents, we had to go to their church in this tiny little rundown town that was very much a fire and brimstone kind of church where you don't do this, you're going to hell. You do this, you're going to hell. Chances are you're probably going to hell anyway. So fine, repent. Gays are bad. This is why HIV and AIDS exist.
Right.
That's
No.
something I remember very much doing that. Religion to me is, I will never, ever begrudge people their faith. You
Sure.
believe what you want to believe in, but when you use man-made words and weaponize them against other people who do not follow your faith, that's when I have a problem.
Yeah.
Believe what you want to believe. Don't try to, impart your religion onto me because I do not care. Religion to me is in a way like homophobia. It's boring. I don't care any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form about it. And I grew up in a home that bred hate, not because of religion, but because of who the people were.
Yeah.
So I don't, yes, a lot of people use their religion to disguise their homophobia, saying, oh, this is what I believe, this is what God believes. But what happens when you take that away and people are just shitty people?
Yeah.
That's what Nate's parents are. That's what I wanted to show, that even though it's set in this time period, and even though there are plenty of queer people who got to grow up in loving homes, there are so many of us who didn't. And I
Right.
wanted to show this as a reality. The idea of found family is a popular trope now, but found family came from queer people. We could not get the love and respect we deserved at our home in our homes growing up. So we had to go out and make our own families.
Yeah.
That's what I had to do. And that's what Nate is doing here, even though he doesn't realize it at the very beginning of the book. Instead of reconciling or even trying to understand his parents' way of thinking over the course of the novel, he realizes that that wasn't him. He didn't do anything to
Right.
them. He just existed and they didn't like the way he existed.
Right.
Therefore, the onus is on them, not on him.
Yeah, and as I was reading that, I grew up in a house very homophobic. I was in the closet. I kind of went the other way. Like I'm gonna get a master divinity. I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna kind of see if religion can kind of fix this. Spoiler alert, it did not. So I had to ditch all of that, and be like, all right, I got to live an authentic life. And
Mhm.
I see Nate um, it cost him his relationship with his parents. It cost him his job, kind of,
Mhm.
and so
Yeah, and Nate, I do want to be clear. It's not just because of his queerness that he
uh,
lost his job. Nate made some very stupid
he
decisions
made
that
some
led
dumb
to,
decisions.
yeah,
Yeah.
right. But
Uh,
he is also, think about it. Think about how, Nate is, by the time we meet him, Nate has matured because of his brokenness. He has gone. But I think about how I was in my 20s when I was a young out queer person. I did so many stupid things, and everything like that. So I love Nate because he is so imperfect. He is so imperfect,
yeah.
and imperfect people are so much more interesting to write about than any other type
Yeah.
of person.
yeah, he made a lot of mistakes, and then he's trying to remedy that by going off to a cabin to be like, all right, I gotta like get my shit together. He literally
Hmm.
like, I'm here to, to like figure out my next steps. And then there's this collision. He runs into, he runs into Alex and Art, and they are like, they've kind of taken over his cabin,
Hmm.
literally at gunpoint to say, hey, um, and poor Art's like, please, put the gun down. Like she's
Right.
like, I got this handled. And so you see this great, I just call it this like great collision of like these broken people who are like, oh no, what do we do? And my poor Nate is like, what am I
What is this?
here? Like, what am I
Because
supposed to do here?
he's expecting the cabin to be empty when he gets there, and
Right.
it's not. He finds these two other people in there, and of course, right away he's not sure what to make of them. But as the novel progresses, we see him letting down his guard. We see him beginning to potentially trust in people, which is something that
Yeah.
he has lost quite significantly for very good reason.
Yeah. And then you have Alex the Marine, who is Art's protector. And um, I love in like, I could not pick up how they were connected for such a long time. You do go into it, but I appreciated how I'm like, what is going on between these two?
Hmm.
'Cause it's not father daughter, like that's
Hmm.
clear. And it was just really, it was a great, I don't want to say it was a great solve. I didn't have to solve anything, but just it kept me paying attention to be like, okay, I need to focus on this.
Hmm.
And that was such a wondrous way to meet these two people. And you see this man, he is weighted down by grief. And so, Nate has his own, but um, so does Alex. And you talked about grief, just how we handle it differently, how in every one of your books I find like there's um this talk on grief, and he is one to compress it. Like
Hmm.
he is a shover downer,
Yep.
and
Compartmentalizes every
yeah,
single thing.
and then he is forced to interact with Art to bring in to connect with her. And yeah, can you talk about that compartmentalizing and how he has to deal with that?
So I've met and then friends with quite a few service members, people who have, especially, you have to remember, especially for younger listeners or younger watchers, there was a time post 9/11 when everybody was signing up for the military.
Right.
Especially if you were, I mean, I graduated high school in the year 2000, so I was 19 when 9/11 happened. And I knew so many people who signed up for this fake war that really we were going after things that we said we were going after, but in actuality we were going after something completely different. Because
Right.
remember, it led to Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction and so
Right.
I found a lot of disillusioned people when they came back. I found a lot of people who had seen horror in the world and had witnessed it firsthand, not just by the actions of the so-called enemy combatants, but sometimes by their own people. I mean, we know, we hear it all the time now, especially with the war in Iraq, a lot of the war crimes that were
Yeah.
committed by soldiers, that were committed by commanders, that were committed by whoever. And the people who were not part of that, but were still, it's still, you're part of the military. And when something like that happens, that puts a mark on the entire thing. And so you have all these people trying to do their job, trying to follow orders, but sometimes those orders are counterintuitive, and then you have to compartmentalize. You have to shove little things down in yourself, especially when you're seeing horrific things, especially if you're in the middle of a firefight, especially if you're driving down the road and all of a sudden the Jeep in front of you explodes because of an IED. You're seeing all these things and you're having to compartmentalize, because what's one thing that the army, the military really doesn't focus on? Mental health.
Right.
They're not like, hey, and you just were in a war zone. Let's talk about it. Let's do this. Let's make sure our VA works perfect. So when you come back, you are able to go in and get the care and that you so desperately need. That's not how it works. That's
No.
how it should work, but that's not how it works. So you see a lot of that compartmentalization. You see a lot of having to shove it down because when that horror is your reality, even when it's gone, even when it's done, it's over with, and it's maybe a year ago, 5, 10, 20 years ago, that horror can still be fresh in your mind because there's still the PTSD aspect of it, of
Yeah.
everything that you went through. So Alex is a soldier. He learns how to compartmentalize because that is what he has been
Right.
trained to do. It is easier to shove something horrific like grief down into a box and lock it away than it is to deal with the grief. And
Yeah.
especially since Nate and Alex and Art are on the run for a large portion of the book, that doesn't really give a lot of time to be able to deal with the traumatic issues. So one thing that I really wanted to focus on with this book is yes, there is a relationship that develops between Nate and Alex, but is that trauma bonding or is that an actual relationship? Just because people go through something horrible together doesn't necessarily mean that they'll stick it out for the long run. So I wanted to be very careful when writing those two characters specifically, that any interaction that they had felt real, felt weighted, and wasn't just, oh shit, we're getting shot at. Now I think I love you. That's how it
Yeah.
works.
And I liked how you had Nate the journalist who has his job is to seek out truth and answers.
Hmm.
And then you've got Alex who's like, I'm not about that life because and I was when I was reading this, you'd have this great dialogue. Nate would ask a tough question and his immediate response is like, we'll talk about that later. And he's
Hmm.
like, I want to talk about it now. And he's
Yeah.
we're not talking about it. And then they would keep driving, or they're at the restaurant. It would always be he would be pushing that off
Hmm.
to be like, and it's like, and as it turns out, I burned out of a job like you burned out of your insurance job.
Yeah.
I burned out of I was a resident director for 10 years. I worked with college freshmen, dumped beers every night of my life, all that. And a friend of mine offered me a job. I'm like, I'm kind of burnt out. Like, I gotta figure this out. He's like, are you good at PowerPoint? I'm like, I'm great at PowerPoint. He's like, are you good at talking? I'm like, it's my favorite thing. They're like, I got a job for you. So I worked for a year in Afghanistan. I was a trainer for
Hmm.
the military. I wasn't military, but they just sort of like we have to have we need nerds is what
Right.
the propaganda poster was like, we need nerds. And I met Alex's every day.
Yeah.
Every day for a year. And I met queer soldiers and you talk about signaling. Like I'd be like, and they're like, like we could just pick up on it. Like I'm like,
Yeah.
and even though and talk about compartmentalizing, they were just like two lock boxes. And
Hmm.
so yeah, I just saw this like something terrible would happen and people would just be quiet about it and not talk about it and
Well,
shut
you
off.
see it especially when you see those articles online or the from photojournalists that show this is what the soldier looked like before they went to war. This is what the soldier looked like when they came back. And
Yeah,
they always look like not to put too much weight on it, but they almost look like Holocaust victims. They've lost weight, they have the dead eyes, their faces are gaunt. They look like they're staring at the middle distance. They're staring through you, not
yeah,
at you. And that's that, they used to call that shell shock. Now we know that that is PTSD. Now that we
right,
know that's trauma. But you see that all the time when you hear that term shell shocked and you looked up soldiers, especially from like World War One, World War Two, Vietnam War, Korea, all of that. It's insane. It is absolutely because they look like, even though they're still technically that person, they look like a shadow of their
yeah,
former self. Because, and look, we can sit here and talk about, how it is to be in war, what it means to be a soldier, but the fact remains I have never been in the military. And so I can't say with any authority that this is what happened. So that's why I talk to people who actually
yeah,
are in that kind of
yeah,
thing. I want to know, because if I'm writing something like that, I better be getting it right, even if it's a fantasy story about a road trip gone to hell.
right, yeah. A road trip gone to hell is
Right.
a time. I'm like, man, they cannot catch a break in this. Yeah. Yeah, I felt for Alex. I felt for him to say like, oh, he's not doing it to be a prick. He's doing it because he's like, this is how I serve. Everybody in this is like, this is what I do to survive. And so
Hmm.
this is what Artemis does. This is what Nate does, and this is what Alex does. And he just shoves it in a box, and it gets to a point where all those boxes just kind of like they just
Topple over and spill
they
open.
can't hold it. Yeah, they can't
Yep,
hold it
exactly.
long. And then on their road trip they encounter a cult,
Hmm.
and I was fascinated by that. I did not see that coming. I didn't see a road trip into a cult
Hmm.
that Artemis had accidentally, I don't know, I don't want to say she created it, but
She
she
played a big part in it.
yeah,
As the story progresses, you
yeah,
will see why. But that cult exists. Um, the reason this book exists is because of a cult,
yeah,
because of something called in the 90s. If you were
yeah,
of age in the 90s, you will probably remember Marshall Applewhite and
yep,
Heaven's Gate.
yep,
And Heaven's Gate was a cult led by Marshall Applewhite who believed that a recently discovered comet called Hale-Bopp held an alien craft in the tail of its comet. And what would happen when Hale-Bopp passed by Earth was that they would ascend into this alien craft.
right,
And what ended up happening, obviously, was that they all committed mass suicide.
right,
They for their beliefs. Now, part of being an author is a two-word question that never goes away. What if?
right,
What if? What if this happened? What if that happened? What if, what if, what if? So in my head is what if they were right? Because this is the 90s. This is the 90s at a time, you have to remember, the beginning of the 90s, nobody had cell phones or the internet. By the very end of the 90s, almost everybody had cell phones and almost everybody had the internet. I posit that the 90s saw the biggest technological leap in recorded history, not
not
because
about,
of the things that were made, but because of how mass produced information became the internet,
yeah,
phones. The internet specifically, I think, is one of the greatest things humanity has ever made, but also the greatest horror that we have ever made. Why? Because think about it. Before the internet, we didn't have school shootings on the way that we have them now. Why is it that it's happening? What's the relation? It's because people can very easily become radicalized online. Stuff
yeah,
that they would never have been able to even read about, now they can. They can read about it. People connect from all over the world, from all these different ideologies with all their different ways of life. Sometimes those can mesh together and sometimes they don't, which is why we see rising anger and vitriol and anonymous troll sock puppet accounts that like to be
yeah,
racist or homophobic, misogynistic, whatever. And this idea of this technological leap just fascinates me because things like Heaven's Gate could go on the internet to spread their ideas. And in fact, the Heaven's Gate website still exists to this day. You can go to the Heaven's Gate website. It looks exactly like it did in the 90s. In fact, I was able to talk to some of the people who still run the website. Now, I need to be very clear. This website and Heaven's Gate does not exist
right,
anymore. This website is basically akin to a museum piece. You
right,
go to a museum to see something hanging on the wall that's never going to be changed. That's what the GeoCities hellscape of this website looks like in from the
yeah,
90s. And it's just it's BS, obviously.
right,
It's ludicrous nonsense. But you can go online on YouTube and watch Marshall Applewhite's videos and see because he talk. It's very clear who he is. He has his big ears that stick
yeah,
out. He has very tan skin. He has a bald head. He's usually wearing white when he's talking to the camera. And the idea of cults have always fascinated me, not because of the true crime aspect of it,
right,
but because of the psychology
yeah,
behind it. Here is somebody, let's say Marshall Applewhite, let's say Jim Jones, let's say David Koresh. Here is somebody who is so charismatic, so idealized that people, yes, susceptible people, but people nonetheless are willing to give up their entire lives
Right.
for a belief, for a mission. Now, do quote unquote cult leaders prey upon people?
Oh, sure.
Absolutely. But where does the line between participate and victim happen?
Right.
Would we say that the people who committed mass suicide in Heaven's Gate are victims? Would we say that they're victims of Marshall Applewhite because they fell under his spell? Or is that giving Marshall Applewhite too much power?
Right.
Is it on the people who made these decisions, however conscious or unconscious they made them, whatever psychology is behind it, whether they were led to believe something that wasn't true, whether they wanted to believe so badly that they're willing to look the other way on anything? I just I find the idea of somebody, because think about it, in a way, this might give you a little bit of trouble. In a way,
Let's do it.
Jesus was like a cult leader
Sure.
because he was charismatic, people followed him, they believed him to be something, and therefore religion has sprung up around it. Can we say that things like Catholicism and Christianity are just very large cults? Yeah, you can say that. But cults, specifically when you're thinking of like Jim Jones, David Koresh, Marshall Applewhite, you're thinking about small groups of people with one person in charge with tremendous amount of power, and not even real mystical magical
Yeah.
power. It's the power of charisma, it's the power of control, it's a power of preying on the weak.
Yeah.
And that's what I find so fascinating behind that. And when we meet the cult in the book, we see that it follows those lines. We see somebody very charismatic, somebody who, if you listen to them talk long enough, you might think, you know what, he kind of has a point. It kind of makes sense. And that's how they get in. That's how it gets
Yeah.
in. Because once that little worm has its way into your brain, it's going to start digging around and making other things, making you go, what if I look this up? That's how things like QAnon happened
Right.
in the United States. That plus the internet equals a cult.
Yeah, and there's this community aspect to it. Amanda Montell wrote this fascinating book called Cultish. So it's
Hmm.
a study of cults and how even like she talks about things being a little bit culty, like Starbucks is a little bit culty.
Hmm.
They change the name of their drinks, so you don't order a small, medium, large,
Right.
order a tall venti
Venti and a grande.
latte,
Yeah.
Trenta. And so if someone had never seen Starbucks, you're like, what the hell? What is a
Yeah.
venti? Like you have to explain it. And they're like, that's a little bit culty. They changed the language, so
Hmm.
language control. And but a big part of it is communities. So I think cults are a corrupted found family because you have this found family thing,
Hmm.
and then you have this cult that is a found family. They have their roles, they have, hey, this is what's going on, the
They're
hierarchy.
coming together because they have the same beliefs, the same ideas. Yeah.
So on the surface, so I game with, you know, my partner and three of my buddies, and we get to and play games and we talk about board games. And from the outside, to be like cult 100%. But everybody can come in, like there's no secrets like a cult is, and there's no hidden information or agenda or levels. But I just saw when I saw like a found family being born through your characters, and then this cult, I was like, oh. And then you have the military aspect come in and interrupt that. And
Hmm.
I almost, you had the Mountain, which is this secret organization that, is corrupt and domineering. And I'm like, again, there's this like cult metaphor coming in of like, we're secret. We have the secret language. You're a member. You're not. This is how the world
Well,
is.
and you should think too that this book was written during the first Trump administration.
Oh,
And it was that was very much the
oh,
the the letter of the day. That's how it worked. You're either with us, you're either MAGA or you're not. You're either
right,
with us or against us. And we're
right.
seeing that now. I mean, as we're recording this, Trump was just inaugurated for a second time yesterday.
Yep,
And what did he do? One of his first things to do was to go on national TV and say the United States is only two genders, male and female. And now he's apparently assigning executive orders that will disrupt people getting passports that match
right,
their gender identity, whether you can be male, female, or they can have it be X. Apparently, that's going to go away now.
right.
So it's yes, it's a cult. Again, it's this big, huge. It's charisma because regardless of what you think about Trump, he's charismatic, and there is that idea of a cult, only just on a mass scale. And again, that to me a large portion of that is fed from the internet.
Right.
The internet, where now we're seeing all the big companies like Facebook, who does Instagram, Meta, whatever they're called, they're relaxing their rules now. Apparently on Facebook, you can call queer people mentally ill, and
Right.
that's not offensive. That is not against their terms of service. So again, here we have the cult, here we have the information, here we have the people. So now that the information is going in one direction towards the cult, what's going to happen to the people underneath?
Right.
It's all about layers. It's all about layers. It always has been in found family, in the corrupt side of found family with this cult. It is about layers, because once you start peeling back, you may get more questions, but you're also going to get answers that you might not like.
Yeah. And and what I preached about this found family was, if Art goes to where she needs to go, you know, Alex and Nate are like, well, then what are we? Who t
Hmm.
like, are we going like this, or are we staying together? And that just seems to be this constant conversation that I really welcomed back, because as this book progresses, I'm like, what is going to happen? Like
Right.
I'm watching this. I In this book, you have the talent. They're on a road trip. There are three people in the car, and you turn the reader into the fourth.
Hmm.
And so I feel like I am in the back seat. Like, what are we gonna do? This is looking not great.
Right.
And Alex is like, shut up. And I'm like, I'm trying to help here, man.
Right.
Um, and you guys need to talk more. Like, can we like pull over? So, yeah, I saw that, and I saw just this every time they'd interact, you would see these, like, whether it was the cult or the mountain, the people hunting them, like, what is this definition of family for people who are the outcasts in their world? Because, Alex, he's like, hey, I'm bi, he was like, I like both. And Nate's like, um, oh, you're bisexual? Like he has to define it for him. Like,
Hmm.
um,
Because, to
he
me,
didn't have the
Alex,
word. Like he
yeah,
didn't
right.
have the
Alex
vernacular.
would never consider the word bisexual. Even though
No,
that's what he is, it's not in his vocabulary to think that way.
no. And he has no one to ask. So
Hmm.
remember, in the 90s, you could not ask the internet questions about this. Where I remember in high school, there was one book. Let me be very clear on this. There was one book about being gay, and I didn't dare check it out because I didn't want a record of it. And so
Right.
I straight up stole that book. And like it was the only crime. I was the biggest nerd. I never got in any trouble, but I remember smuggling that as if I was
Hmm.
a mule in a Mexican cartel. I'm like, get this book home. And I
Yeah.
like stashed it. And it was just like this handbook on like, hey, by the way, you're gay and this is what it means. And poor Alex, like he's in the Marine Corps, and he just doesn't have someone to ask that question.
Right, because again, like we talked about previously, this was don't ask, don't tell
Right,
time. This was the Clinton era where queer people, you existed, but don't you dare talk about it.
right.
Don't you say anything about it. Don't you ask questions. Don't you say, here comes the Marine ball or whatever. And look at all these lovely heterosexual couples coming in and dancing together. You did not bring your partner to something like that,
Oh,
because don't ask, don't tell. And if you showed
right.
up in public, that was telling.
Yeah.
And that was something that you still at that point could get discharged from the military for. Even though the don't ask, don't tell existed, we'll still hear you still hear stories to this day of people who were affected by don't ask, don't tell to the point where they were discharged from the military and turned around and later, many years later, sued for that to
Yeah.
have their record reinstated so they wasn't considered a dishonorable discharge. It was considered honorable. And you see there's people who have actually sued to have that changed because they were queer at a time when being queer in the military was something you did not mention out loud.
I had a friend of mine in the Navy. He had a boyfriend. He was dishonorably discharged, the whole thing. And before Biden left, he applied. Biden said, "Hey, I will pardon those who were, dishonorably discharged, and he had to go through TJ had to go through I cannot explain this, a mountain of paperwork to get that done. And you
But
know,
it's something that was
yeah.
too it was something that should have been done many years ago.
And it was a felony.
Yeah.
So
Oh
because
yeah.
and so every time he applied for a job, it was, do you have a felony on your record? He's like,
It's just
yeah,
it's
I had a boyfriend in the Navy. And they're like, what? And
mhm.
he's like, it was a different time. Like, so my heart goes out as you read, my friends, as you read this, like, and you read Alex, like, he has this tough exterior, and please do not, be mad at him, but he's just trying to figure it out. And
He's a little slow on the uptake, but only because he has been compartmentalizing his entire life.
right.
Especially the last decade of his life,
Yeah.
when we find out what was his life was like before. But the last decade of his life specifically, he's had to compartmentalize so much. And when you do that, when that's all you know, having to do the exact opposite is not going to be something that's
Right.
ever easy. It's going to be something where you're basically chipping away at a mountain with a pickaxe.
Yeah.
But somebody like Nate and somebody like Art, they're willing to pick up that pickaxe and keep on going until
Yeah.
you find something.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so good. Yeah. Whose hands do you want this book to reach the most?
Um, I always write for queer people. They are always first and foremost at the center of my mind. Because when I was a kid, you never got to see yourself in books. The
Correct.
first book I ever got to see gay people in was after I came out to my librarian at age 16. She gave me the first book I ever saw gay people in. And that was a book called The Front Runner by Patricia Nell Warren. If you
Okay.
do not know that book, it was written in the 70s. It was considered to be the first critically and commercially successful gay novel. It was
Okay.
written by a straight white woman. And the book is about, I'm going to spoil a 50-year-old book here, but the book is about
It's been out.
a collegiate college coach named Harlan who's training a college runner for the Olympics. And the book is their relationship and how they get closer together and how they fall in love. And then the book ends with Billy, the runner, getting assassinated at the Olympics. That's the end of the book.
Yeah.
He dies,
Mm.
and everything is sad.
Okay.
And just imagine that being the first book you get to see yourself in. You get to see people like you, and then they're murdered. I I was so grateful that when my first book came out, Patricia Nell Warren reached out to me and said
Oh,
she had read it and said she had liked it. And I told her, I fangirled. I said, my first gay book was The Front Runner. And I'll never forget what she said to me after that. She said, I am so sorry that
yeah.
was your
Oh,
first
yeah.
gay book. Because she knew how that can affect people. Yes, it was a different time. Again, this was the 70s when she wrote and published this book. But for me, the reason I told that story is, for me, I want queer people to be able to see themselves in a book, get to see queer people going on adventures, being the heroes, being the villains, being in danger, fighting, cults and the government and everything like that, and getting to be happy and getting to find happiness in the world.
Right.
I don't want to write a tragedy. I never want to write a book like The Front Runner, because that's all so many of us got to have for so long.
Yeah.
Why can't queer people be the heroes of a story? Why can't I write? I wanted to write a queer action movie. So I wrote The Bones Beneath My Skin.
Right.
You never see like Die Hard. You're never going to see Bruce Willis get the guy, because that's not how
Right.
those movies
Right.
work. So
Yeah.
why can't we have action movies, conspiracy thrillers? Why can't we have those things? Just have them be queer characters front and center. We
Yeah.
can run from cults just the same as everybody else.
Yeah. We can save the day. Like, we have
Right.
skills. You have no
Right.
idea.
So
Um,
I wrote this book for queer people, but I also wrote this book for people who still have a sense of wonder and
yeah.
ask that question, what if?
Yeah. Queer people have a sense of wonder, and trust
Yeah.
me, that is a very that's a good audience. That's a good audience to put this book in the hands of. My niece once asked me, talking about representation, she's like, what was the name of your gay club in high school? I'm like, the inside of a locker. What are you talking?
Right.
Like, I don't know.
Right.
She's like, what? I'm like, what? So, like, I had to, like, Like, behold the documentary of, representation where like when I'm dating myself a lot, but like there was an old TV show called Soap and Billy
Yeah,
Crystal
yeah.
was the gay character.
Hmm.
I was like I would watch that just to be like, what? And then it was like Ellen, and then it was like Will and Grace. You would have thought like they were doing like public hangings on,
Right.
people responded. But then it like slowly just, and then, thank God for HBO, where I'm like, all right, now I know what's up. But
I remember the first, aside from the book, The Front Runner, I remember the first queer film I ever saw was from 1999. Do you remember the movie Trick?
I think so, yeah.
With Nev Campbell's younger brother as the main
Yeah,
character falling in love with a go-go dancer, and it follows him over
yeah,
one single night, and the movie ends with a tentative hope for the future of between these
right.
two characters. And I remember watching that going, ah,
Finally, yeah.
finally having look at this. Look at this.
Yeah,
It's cute. It's two people, two guys coming together and getting to go on an adventure together. Nothing bad happens
right.
to the people in there. And Tori Spelling is a fat hag for whatever reason
Yeah,
in this movie, and she does a pretty good job. But it's just I remember watching something like that, going, why can't everything be like this?
yeah. Well, TJ, you're helping everything be like this, and I really appreciate this novel, um, "The Bones Beneath My Skin." TJ, tell me when it comes out.
It comes out on Tuesday, February 4th, and I will be going on tour for that. I'm doing a Midwest tour this time, but all those things are on my website. But just a warning, I believe it's crazy to think, but I believe every single tour stop is sold out. So
All right.
you're going to have to double check to see. Maybe you can get on the waiting list if you want to go, but that's at tjklunebooks.com.
Yeah. Well, TJ, thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And my friends, you've got to get this book in your hands on February 4th, where everyone sells books. You can find this book. Thank you so much, TJ. And
Thank you, Ryan. I appreciate being here. It was wonderful.
you got it. Thank you so much. Hey, and if you want more information, I've got a little newsletter. I'll talk more about TJ. Yeah, just check this out. Thanks so much.